Hello and welcome to week 16 of Jets Final Drive. I'm your host, Jeane Coakley, and like always, I'm joined by SNY NFL insider Connor Hughes. And today we are joined by Joe Caporoso. Right, Joe? Did I say it right again?
Got it.
Yes.
Holiday present. I love it.
That's it. Turn of the Jets and the Badlands podcast. And guys, it's the holidays, so I'm putting a hat on. I also didn't wash my hair, so we just figured I'd throw a hat on anyways. But I'm excited because it's the holiday season, so let's spread cheer, okay? Just a reminder, you can find the audio version of Jets Final Drive on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So the Jets fell to 4-11 after losing to the Rams 19-9. It was a game that started with a great opening drive touchdown for the Jets, but they just couldn't capitalize on their scoring opportunities the rest of the game. However, though, the Jets did set a record as they were the second team since 1940 to have not have punted in a game, but they only failed to score 10 points.
We are all witnesses.
Yes, see? Witnesses. And you know what? That 99-yard drive, we were pretty excited, Connor, that first drive. We're like, Yes, okay, they're back.
Yeah, they're back. Yeah, points, baby. Let's go, yeah. Hey, it was functional.
All right, so anyways, Aaron Rodgers currently sits at 499 career touchdowns and was clearly trying to throw his 500th to Devontae, who has also caught his 200th and 400th career TD. All right, Connor, we were talking about this in the press box. Since the Jets are out of the playoffs, do you care that he's looking to find Devontae for that 500th milestone?
Me? No,
Yeah.
I don't give a crap. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I'm sitting there watching the game just like anyone else. It's a cool storyline if Adams catches 500 after catching 200 and 400. It'd be pretty cool. But again, I don't matter. My opinion on this topic doesn't matter. What does is the 9 other players that are out there on the field, the 3, 4, 5 other players that are running routes on any given play. Those guys who are busting their you-know-whats to try to get open against coverages, only to know what they do does not matter because the quarterback has very clear tunnel vision for one player and one player only. We saw it on the 4th and 4 fade go ball to Davante Adams when Garrett Wilson is wide open over the middle of the field. The number of first read plays that are drawn up for Adams, that are drawn up for Allen Lazard, completely forgetting about guys like Garrett Wilson who had just 3 targets in this game going into the final offensive possession of the game. Guys like Tyler Conklin who is working his way open. Guys like Breece Hall who's open in the flat. Those guys all play second fiddle to Adams, and that is something that I believe could cause issues. I mean, I don't care. You don't care. Joe doesn't care who catches his 500th touchdown. But the players on the field who are truly out there trying their best to make something and get open and having it be meaningless in a way, I think it absolutely rubs them the wrong way. No, I actually should say I know. I know it rubs them the wrong way.
Yeah, and Joe, I mean, Rodgers found himself once again banged up against the Rams. No secret that Rodgers is tough. He goes in through injuries. Do you credit him for playing through all his multitude of injuries in this failing season?
It's hard to be mad about a guy who battled back from what he did, trying to play all 17 games and stay out there. You do wonder if, after he got banged up in the Minnesota game, if they play Tyrod for a few weeks, does that allow him to get healthier? Does it keep the offense on track a little more? And when these things happen, this is why you got a competent backup to come in and step in and, fill the gap for a couple of games or even a couple of series if needed. I think what that injury was yesterday was a reminder that while there's been a couple nice moments here, Rodgers is going to be 41 and 42 next season, and these injuries are going to keep happening more, not less. He's going to continue to get banged up. Older players get hurt, and you're really rolling the dice if you're assuming he's going to play 15, 16, 17 games this year. In some ways, the Jets have been lucky that he's done that, but in other ways, you wonder, would they have been better served with him playing like 12 or 13 games? And I don't know. Yesterday's game, I think, left a bad taste in the mouth at certain different times for Jet fans because the Jets at times could feel a little bit like an AAU basketball team where it's like just a bunch of guys trying to like rack up milestones and stats and like nobody really cares about the holistic game plan and trying to win the game overall. Now, they're not exactly the best coach team in the league right now, and you saw some of the clock management yesterday, but it did feel a little forced at times, even with Rodgers playing through the injury and trying to get over the hump for number 500, which, he cares about. I don't know how much Jet fans really care about it. It's not like he's been a Jet his whole life. He's played like 15 games for them. I don't know. Yesterday, I think, was a little bit of a needed reminder that even though things look good against Mac Jones and the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Jets are 4-11, and 3 of their 4 wins are against 3 teams who are going to be picking in the top 4 next year. They're 4-11 for a reason. And I kind of have a bad feeling that the Buffalo game is going to be a little bit more of the same. A team that's better than the Rams and has a better defense and is a harder place to play than MetLife. So we'll see. I think Rodgers is going to do everything in his power to play all 17 games. Should that influence the Jets' decision to keep him next year? Not necessarily. Leave it to the new general manager, leave it to the new head coach, and hopefully the Jets start playing more for the right reasons than necessarily just personal milestones in these final games.
Yeah, it's only going to get worse. That's the big thing here is that he's only going to get a year older. The play recognition is going to get a little bit slower. The arm's not going to be a little bit less strong. The accuracy is going to wane a little bit, and the body is going to be more brittle. This is now a player, Joe, that while he hasn't missed any games this year, I talked about this in the last Jets final drive, he had his hamstring injured to the point that it was such a significant degree, I was told by one team source, that it was the most significant degree that you can have with it still being attached to the bone. That's how bad his hamstring injury was. So if you take that into consideration and you look at the last 3 years of Aaron Rodgers' career, his final year with the Packers had a thumb injury that significantly limited his ability as a passer. Year 2 had the Achilles injury that sidelined him the entire year. And now this season you have seen foot, you have seen knee, you have seen ankle, and you have seen hamstring injuries. It's hard to commit to that player long term when you know those injuries are going to continue to come about and come about and come about unless you stick with the reliable backup. Because the one thing the Jets will have to do, and it's a discussion they're going to have, if you let Rodgers walk, you do need to replace his production. Yes, you have the questions with the injuries, you've got questions with some of the off-field stuff, you have questions with his relationship with some teammates, but you still need to replace the production that you've gotten, which has still been, in spite of all of this, top 5 in Jets franchise history. So you need to replace that. How are you going to do it? Is Tyrod and a rookie going to do it? Is somebody else in free agency going to do it? I don't necessarily know. So it is a very difficult problem that the Jets face, and I don't think there's a clear-cut answer or clear-cut solution on how to fix it.
All right, let's move on to topic 2 because you kind of touched on this a little bit. Garrett Wilson was obviously very frustrated following the loss, where he only had 3 catches until that final drive. So, Joe, why aren't the Jets doing everything they can to get Wilson the ball and make sure he feels confident going into the offseason?
Well, I am sure that there's an element of game planning that involves getting Garrett Wilson the football. How often the quarterback is sticking to that game plan, I think, is where it becomes debatable. I think you had the play that was the biggest microcosm of this was the 4th and 4 where they went for it and he sort of threw it up to Devontae on a jump ball down the sideline. And Garrett Wilson, they set up in the slot, was wide open over the middle of the field. That's a play really designed for him as sort of the primary target. They can't force Rodgers to throw him the football. And I think part of what makes Rodgers and Adams great is they will improvise and they will do their own thing at the line of scrimmage. It makes them very difficult to defend at times, but it also means that an inordinate amount of passes will get funneled to him. And even if the Jets are drawing up plays for Garrett Wilson, he may not be getting the target volume that he needs. Now, I know if you look at his raw targets, they're pretty impressive, but what is the quality of targets? How many of them came in garbage time? Like he got 3 or 4 yesterday. And how many of them are 1-yard hitch routes or smoke screens or setting him up to get leveled by 4 defenders? Throw the ball down the freaking field to the guy. Literally every time they do it, he either draws pass interference or makes a ridiculous catch. They should be throwing him a go route once per quarter. It's similar with Breece Hall. Every time they check it down to him, he gets 15 yards. He's caught 53 of his 70 targets this year. So many more opportunities should be going to these 2 guys because beyond all of this, they're supposed to be your building blocks for the next 5, 8, 10 years. Devontae and Rodgers, best case scenario, are here next year, and then they are done. So I think they're trying. I am not as doom scrolling or depressed that Wilson is done here. He's definitely going to request a trade. I think money talks. I think there'll be a new regime. I think there'll be a new head coach, a new general manager, a new offensive coordinator, and probably a new quarterback, and probably a new contract for Garrett Wilson to look at. And I think that could go a long way for him to stick around. But I get the frustration. You're out there. really good and you're predominantly being used as a decoy receiver, or you're practicing all week for a play designed for you. You go out there, the play gets changed at the line, and look, sometimes it works. Devontae was awesome against the Jaguars and still really, really good. But then you have a game where you score 9 points, and I get the frustration. And it's been hard for Wilson, who still, in spite of all this, is going to have 3 1,000-yard seasons to start his career. And for a Jet receiver, man, that is very rare, which is why I hope the first thing the new general manager does is pull him into the office and make the pitch about why this is going to be good for his career and extend him proactively. And this does not devolve into an ugly situation. I think Jet fans can only take so much, right? You're bad for all these years to get good, exciting young players to build around. You brag and are annoying on Twitter about the Jamal Adams trade because you get Garrett Wilson. Then he's just going to leave in 3 years and go to the Chargers and win playoff games with Harbaugh and Herbert. Like, what is even the point here at that stage?
Yeah, I there were a couple comments, Joe, that were made after Davante Adams got here that pinged in my head, like, or I was like, oh, that's noteworthy. And one of the things that Rodgers specifically had said multiple times is he is a true X. He is a true the guy. And when the Jets first acquired Davante Adams, I thought they did so because he was going to be the complement to Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson was still going to be this offense's bulldog, and then Adams was going to take some attention away from him and be the Robin, be the 1B, be the second guy to Garrett Wilson. It has become very, very, very clear that that is not the case. That the moment that the Jets got Davante Adams, Rodgers viewed this as, there's my number one receiver, there's my go-to guy, and then I'll get it to Wilson when Adams isn't there. That should not be the case. Far, far, far too often, week in and week out, Garrett Wilson is the second option on routes, whether that's by play call or whether that's on the quarterback. As Joe had just said, that's just not acceptable. It's just not good enough. He needs to be the focal point. He is a better, more dynamic, more explosive player than Davante Adams, so get him the ball. And one of the reasons why I think there's been this chasm between he and Rodgers, and they just haven't necessarily got on the same page. I actually went back and talked to people that worked directly with Wilson when he was at his best, when he was working with Mike LaFleur, when he had Joe Flacco and Mike White throwing to him, because the best games of Garrett Wilson's career, guys, they came with Mike White. When you're thinking about the Chicago Bear game, the Minnesota Viking game, or Joe Flacco in that breakout Cleveland Brown game, why were those quarterbacks, Flacco and White, why were those guys able to have so much success with Wilson and Rodgers can? And I actually talked to Mike White specifically about this, and what he told me was that he used to go up to Wilson every day during the weeks leading up to games, and then several times during a game, and say to him, what do you want on this route? What are you looking to accomplish on this route? Because the one way that Garrett Wilson plays football, and it's the way that Robert Saleh described as his superpower, is that he's a little bit of an improviser in his routes. He's not a technician. He's not a guy that's going to have an in route breaking in at 7 3/4 yard and break in at 7 3/4 yard. He's going to get to a point on the field, and then he's going to read the defender, he's going to read the coverage, and he's going to figure out a way to get open. That worked with Flacco. That worked with Mike White because Mike White was hell-bent on getting on Garrett Wilson's page. With Aaron, that's not the case. Aaron wants Garrett on his page. Aaron wants that route run at 7 3/4 yard. Aaron wants it done so precisely and technically and exactly how it's written in the playbook. And it's just this, it's not meshing. It's just not. And that's why you see, like Joe said, it's not just about the number of targets. It's not just something I say, oh, wow, he's top 5 in targets. It's the quality of targets. It's not the checkdowns. It's not the screens. It's not the, oh, he's okay, let's just throw it to Garrett for 3 yards. They're not designing ways to get him open because I just don't think the quarterback and receiver are on the same page like Garrett was with Joe Flacco, like Garrett was certainly with Mike White.
And Connor, you mentioned Mike LaFleur because Wilson actually spoke to him because he was the Rams' current offensive coordinator, and he said that he may have taken that time for granted. Joe, do you think firing LaFleur was the start of the Jets' downfall?
I think for this regime, that's when the meddling really ramped up, I would say. And it seems like the impression is that Saleh might have not been fully on board with that, and they downgraded, right? I mean, LaFleur was not perfect. The Jets did not score an offensive touchdown down the stretch when they went from 7-4 to 7-10, but he was creative. He was certainly better than Hackett. I would argue he's better than Downing, and Downing's been okay. but was that really the move they needed to make? And I just think the coaching staff, particularly on the offensive side of the football, has taken a step back since they got rid of him. Like if Sean McVay has use for him, the Jets should have had use for him in some shape or form. And he had to be the fall guy instead of Zach Wilson, which I don't necessarily agree with, because LaFleur was creative in manufacturing ways and manufacturing different ways for the Jets to score points with different quarterbacks. So I think there's been a lot of things that went wrong when we look back at the Douglas Solly years. I think the downgrade from LaFleur to Hackett will be looked at as one of the many turning points offensively, because there were some things that you would have liked to build on, and you want to grow with a young coach. And I don't necessarily know that the Jets, I think, still could have gotten Rodgers without Hackett. I don't think the only reason Rodgers came here is because Hackett was their offensive coordinator. I think he needed somewhere else to go. I think he liked the Jets defense. I think he liked Douglas. I think he liked Saleh. I think he liked Brees and Garrett Wilson. They could have got him without Hackett. And look, maybe LaFleur was, a little too outside the box. They didn't think he'd mesh with Rodgers, and that's a bigger problem and bigger conversation. But the Jets will be looking for a new offensive coordinator next year, and they couldn't do much worse than finding a guy like LaFleur who showed some real promise, even though he had his downsides. He was certainly not perfect in 2022. He was also dealing with Zach Wilson, then a hurt Mike White, then Zach Wilson back in the lineup, then Chris Streveler, then Flacco also mixed in. He was not really set up to succeed at the quarterback position during his tenure here.
And I know, Connor, you and I were leaving the stadium. We got to run into him. He seems happy. He's excited, and you were happy to see him.
Oh, I love Mike. Yeah, and he said, the grass wasn't always green. It's important to remember, too, with LaFleur that, that offense ranked top 5 in points and in yards when that offense was run by anyone other than Zach Wilson. And I actually talked to Robert Saleh specifically about this after he'd gotten fired, and he said, when you go back and you watch some of the game film, the all 22 of our offense, like when Mike LaFleur was calling the plays, if you look at the first read, like where the ball is supposed to go, there's a real good portion of time there where the first read is open. Zach Wilson just wasn't throwing it. And it was a disconnect. Mike was a little bit more of a harder coach and coached with a stronger fist than I think Zach Wilson was ready for coming to the NFL. And I think that hurt him, and the relationship was kind of flawed that either way. But in that alternate reality, Joe, I know you said that the Jets, they still might have gotten Rodgers. I don't think that was actually going to be the case. In fact, the one thing that was going to happen in the Hackett and Rodgers were tied. That was actually the case. Rodgers liked the Jets absent that, but I don't think he was ever going to work for LaFleur again. He and Matt, that relationship wasn't very good. But what the alternate Jets reality if they don't have Aaron Rodgers? Todd Downing is still hired. He takes the Greg Knapp role after he had passed away. He was going to be the veteran guy who had done it before in the room with Mike LaFleur. And then they were going to have Derek Carr. And instead of Alan Lazard, they were going to have Jacoby Myers. And they were going to continue to try to rebuild and infuse that offensive line. Now, was that going to be significantly better? Were they going to be in a better spot? I mean, Carr certainly struggled in New Orleans. But I do think that here with the Jets, he would have had a little bit more to work with maybe than he does have with the Saints.
All right, guys, let's move on to topic 3, because I feel, Joe, maybe last time you were on or one of these shows, I feel like we're always talking about the kicking situation. Because, well, the Jets continue to have a bad situation when it comes to kickers. Jeff Alberg said the Jets will make a decision about the direction they want to go at kicker this afternoon. Joe, do the Jets need to make it a top priority to find a kicker and fix their special teams this offseason?
Yeah, I think, look, Carlson's had some nice moments. You want to bring him back into training camp and let him compete? Sure. I think the Zerline years are over. I would go get another veteran to compete with Carlson. They need a new returner. Xavier Gibson, nice story, but hasn't done anything since the Bills game week 1 of 2023. Like, one of the worst returners in the league. I have no idea how he's up high in the Pro Bowl voting. They need to get better there and get more explosive. And, I think Boyer's had a really good run here. He's somehow survived like 3 or 4 different regimes, which is rare on the coaching side for the Jets. But I think it's just time for a new voice. And I'm sure he'll get a different job somewhere else because he's had a good run. But it's time, I think, for the Jets to refresh on special teams. They have quietly been really bad. I mean, not quietly with the kicking game. They've been really bad on special teams sort of across the board here. And they need more juice in the return game. They need more consistency in the kicking game. They could stand to be better on coverage and have less penalties. Herb Charles is kind of a boomer bust guy. Like, he'll make a huge hit. He'll also get like 5 ridiculous penalties a season. So They need some new blood there. And I think, look, they're about to reset everything, reset the special teams with it. I think you can look back and have a lot of what ifs with the kicking game this year. And yeah, maybe the Jets win a couple more games if it's better, but there's bigger problems here. The reason they're 4-11 is not predominantly because their kickers have stunk.
Yeah, they'll find somebody else. I don't think it's going to be Greg Zuerlein. Connor Rodgers was actually the one that put it perfectly when he compared kickers to relief pitchers. Like, they're great until they're not. And I think that's probably the perfect description of it. Look at Justin Tucker. I mean, he was one of the best kickers to ever walk this planet, and now suddenly he just looks off with the Ravens. You have Jake Elliott with the Philadelphia Eagles. He'd been money for so many years. Now he looks off in Philadelphia. It just happens for these guys, and usually they need to be cut and they need to go somewhere else, and then eventually maybe they find it, or sometimes they don't. Graham Gano with the Giants, an example of somebody who found new blood. It happens everywhere. It's just a matter of getting the right guy in your building. And then trusting them and hopefully finding him. And the Jets found it with Myers. The Jets found it with Zuerlein for a minute. Now they just need to find it with somebody else.
All right, moving on, because they're looking for a GM, as we all know. This week they interviewed former Falcons GM Thomas Dimitroff, former Titans GM John Robinson, and scout Jim Nagy. Is there anyone the Jets interviewed so far that gets you excited as a potential candidate? Joe, we'll start with you.
I mean, I like Dimitroff's resume the best of those three. I think Robinson's done some good things. I think no harm in talking to, Nagy. It's a little outside the box. But I think Dimitroff, like, healthy winning record, built a Super Bowl team, a team that really should have won the Super Bowl if not for, like, the greatest comeback in NFL history. Very locked into analytics and I think a more forward-looking way of building a team. I do wonder, and I don't know if the Jets are going to do this. They're probably not, honestly. Like, he strikes me, could he be your, like, president of football operations and help you go hire a GM? And he helps you rebuild your analytics and scouting department. And then you go get a guy who does more of the numbers and the budgeting and clears up all of Joe Douglas's void years that are going from now until 2050, like a Greenberg from Tampa Bay or something. Dimitroff, I think, should be like a serious candidate. Robinson, I don't love how it ended in Tennessee, and I don't love that he seemed to, have this power struggle with Vrabel, who I think is Jet fans' top priority is getting the head coach, whether that's realistic or not. Still, you could do worse. Nagy, I think that, is more of kind of like they're trying to, turn over every rock, fine-tune their process before they could start interviewing the Agnews, the Borgonzis, the Greenbergs, the guys who are still in the playoffs and still have teams right now. Dimitroff definitely caught my eye the most of the three, though. It's really hard to look at his resume and be like, that's like not good enough for the Jets. Like, it's a pretty solid, credible resume overall.
Yeah, I liked him a lot too, and I'm probably a little bit more high on Robinson than you are, Joe, although, as you said, I mean, the fact that his relationship with Vrabel, because the first time that people saw Robinson was going to interview for the Jets, the immediate connection was, oh my God, he worked with Vrabel, this is a way to get Vrabel. From my understanding, that relationship was pretty tried and tired out by the end of their tenure there in Tennessee. They were not in a super great place, and I would actually probably be surprised if Robinson and Vrabel ended up working together again. But you look at the draft hits from him with Robinson, I mean, there's a ton. I'm not even talking about just first-round picks that he hit on, but guys like A.J. Brown in the second round. He found Derrick Henry in the second round. I mean, he really built a really good team. And during his tenure there in Tennessee, they never had a losing record. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think when he was fired, they still had a winning record at 1.2. So, I mean, they were a really, really good team. He built playoff teams with multiple different coaches. He built playoff teams that won playoff games, an alien concept as well. So I like him a lot. I also like Dimitroff a lot. But and like you said, I think he doesn't get enough credit for the way that he turned around a Falcon team that had been really, really bad for a really, really long time. And the one thing that I can tell you specifically about this Jets GM search, though, and this is not a requirement, this isn't a prerequisite. They aren't going to kick people out of the interview room if they haven't had this before, but there is a increased value, more so than when they hired Idzik, more so than even when they promoted Tannenbaum, more so when they hired Joe Douglas or Mike McCagnon. They do believe that it is incredibly beneficial and it is preferred if the person has done the job as a general manager before, because it is very, very hard to be a first-time head coach or a first-time general manager in this market in New York. It's very hard to learn on the job. Maybe when there's a little less pressure, maybe when things aren't amped up as much, maybe when everything you do isn't analyzed and diagnosed like it is here in New York, you can have maybe a little bit more success and a little bit more runway. But someone who's done it before, I think, would be, is a preferred thing over with the Jets. Although, again, they're not ruling out first-time candidates. But like I said on pregame this Sunday, if you have done it before, your resume is bumped a little bit to the top of the list.
All right, guys. Speaking of resumes, how about some former Jets quarterbacks? Huh? Topic
Yeah.
5.
Well,
Let's see. Former Jets quarterbacks Sam Darnold and Geno Smith dueled it out on Sunday, and Mark Sanchez was actually calling the game. So let's just throw in all the Jets quarterbacks all in one, mix. The Vikings ended up beating the Seahawks 27-24. So much emphasis is placed on the quarterback in today's football. But every season, teams make the playoffs with quarterbacks who were written off completely. Like Geno said, yeah, they wrote, but he didn't write back. So, Joe, are quarterbacks' success based on being in the right system with good coaches, or does it just take the time to develop?
I think the right situation and the right coach could do wonders. And I think this is at least how I'm justifying it to myself as a Jet fan and to other Jet fans where, like, look, Rodgers probably is not going to be the quarterback next year. And I can't give you a really exciting name off the top of my head that's going to have you running out to buy season tickets if they're starting Tyrod Taylor week 1 or Justin Fields. What I will say is that if you get the coach right and you look at recent NFL history, Case Keenum and Nick Foles played each other in an NFC championship game. Tyrod Taylor broke the Bills' playoff drought and started a playoff game. Daniel Jones won a playoff game. Mason Rudolph and Joe Flacco started playoff games in the AFC last year. So these names that don't jump off the page, if they are coached right and they are in a good situation and they have the right talent, you can be more competitive than I think people expect. And Geno and Sam are great examples. Geno Smith's a playoff quarterback now. He's made the playoffs. He's leading a team with a winning record. Sam Darnold's an MVP candidate right now, which is crazy, but like he is. And so some of these names that sound like not inspiring, if you hire the right coach, you have a chance to maybe be better than everyone expects next year, because you look at some of the names that have had success and gotten to the playoffs, which for the Jets, that's the first box they need to check. Yeah. No one expects them to win a Super Bowl next year or the year after. Can you just end the playoff drought? It's the longest playoff drought in American professional sports. Can you get the monkey off the back? Can you go 9-8 and make the wild card and no one has to talk about this anymore? Yeah, I think if you have the right coach with a quarterback like Tyrod or of a similar skill set, a couple things break right. Sure, the Jets, if Braxton Berrios could catch against the Vikings, they probably would have made the playoffs in 2022 with Mike White and Zach Wilson as their quarterback. They probably would have got killed in the first round, but they would have made the playoffs. So that's how I'm trying to rationalize this in my head. If they could get the right coach and the right offensive coordinator, that could they coach someone to being the 15th or 16th best quarterback in the league and everything else works out finally, and they can get over the hump.
Connor, it's crazy because Sam Darnold has won 13 games this year with the Vikings. That's as many games as he's won his entire time with the Jets. Is it better to try finding these quarterbacks in need of a second chance in free agency, or do you just roll the dice and draft a QB?
I mean, it depends. Like, I think the Sam Darnold, the thing with Sam is that like he has been put into quarterback heaven. I mean, he literally was put into the absolute perfect situation for any passer to be thrown into. I think that anyone would be having success, maybe not this much success as Sam is, but the amount of like being able to be a successful quarterback, that's the perfect spot. Kevin O'Connell is an absolutely unbelievable head coach. You have the best wide receiver in the NFL in Justin Jefferson, a pretty damn good one in Jordan Addison, and then, oh, by the way, a tight end and running back as well, an elite level offensive line, and now a great defense as well that's playing their you-know-what's off with Brian Flores. So this really is just a perfect situation. If you could take everything the Vikings have, throw a Jets jersey and helmet on him, and then put another quarterback in there, yeah, I think you could even see someone like Daniel Jones go have success with the Minnesota Vikings. That literally is the perfect place. You just have to have all of that. I think the Jets have the weapons now like Minnesota does when you talk about Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams if he comes back. Conklin's a good player. The offensive line, 4 or 5 pieces put together. Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis. I mean, there's a lot of nucleus there. But the big thing is you got to get the coaching right, too, because that's what the Jets haven't had these last few years. Probably one of the big reasons why the quarterbacks have failed as much as they have, along with the fact that some quarterbacks that they drafted just weren't very good, like Zach Wilson. But you got to have both. And Minnesota, Seattle, Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield as well, they've created these perfect cocoons for a quarterback to be put into and really thrive.
All right, guys, looking towards the offseason. I can't believe there's 2 more games left, and we're going to talk about the offseason. Would you like the Jets to do a full rebuild or try to salvage their assets to build a winning team? Joe, you kind of answer that because you just want to make the damn playoffs.
I think the answer could kind of be both. I think I'm not saying they should be trading everyone on their roster, but I'm saying it's okay to move past Rodgers, Lazard, try to find a way to keep Devontae Adams, move off of CJ Mosley, free up some cap space, get a better coaching staff in here that like has it together on game day. It has a plan and a strategy and control over what their quarterback is doing out there. You have another top 7 pick probably. You have a good young offensive line. Is that a full rebuild? I don't know. It's a full rebuild when you have a new head coach and a new general manager and a new quarterback, I suppose. But I'm not trading Garrett Wilson. I'm not trading Sauce Gardner. I'm not trading Breece Hall. I'm not trading Jermaine Johnson. You have Will McDonald. You have Quinnen Williams. You have Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis. You have Olu Fashanu. You have Joe Tippmann. This is not a totally barren situation.
You want to keep Damian Sherwood? Is that someone you want to try to keep in the
in a post-Mosley world, in a post-Mosley world, I think you want to keep Sherwood running with Quincy Williams. Maybe you add another veteran in the mix to help chew up some reps. Go get a safety who could, be a ball hawk and make some consistent tackles. And maybe you slot in Eccles instead of DJ Reed if you lose in free agency, and could be okay on defense. I don't think they're going to be as good as they were a few years ago. I think they'll be better with some better defensive linemen than they were this year. So I think with coaching and a couple strategic decisions on the roster, this team could be right around 500 next year without having to blow the whole thing up. I am not in a rush to trade young, talented players who could be the faces of this franchise. I do think part of the challenge of keeping Rodgers, because on field, Rodgers will be the best option. I can't make an argument for you that like Tyrod's probably going to be better than him on field, or Justin Fields will be better than him, or trading for friggin' Sam Howell or Kyle Trask or drafting a second-round quarterback could be better than Rodgers on field. It's bigger than that, though, because you're going to have a new head coach. And Rodgers, if he's here, is the center of the universe. It's Rodgers' team. He's one of the most famous NFL players in the world. It's very hard to implement a new culture and a new regime if you have a 42-year-old quarterback who is going to do it his way, and that's it. And I just wonder what is the trade-off? Can you really turn the page without that? So that's kind of where my head's at.
And this is real quick is that, Joe, you made a good point about Rodgers. This isn't like when Phillip Rivers went to the Colts. You know what I mean? This isn't like when any of these other veterans who were aging as they got older went to another team. Matt Ryan went to the Colts, like where it was like, all right, we're going to fit in and try to do things the way that, this is my talent. I'm a quarterback. I'm going to go try to be the quarterback for you guys. No, Aaron Rodgers has had issues with a lot of the coaches that he's played for. I know he's spoken highly of them after he's left, whether it was McCarthy or whether it was Flor, and like he has Saleh. But at the end of the day, I mean, you see the clips on the sideline, whether it was the shove of Saleh or when he was walking off the field MFing LaFleur because he didn't like a certain play call, or some of the problems that fell apart with McCarthy. I mean, it's very clear that he wants things done a certain way. And, I know he's played in different offenses, as he spoke about when I asked him that question a few weeks ago, but still, it's very clear that he wants things done a certain way. He is very opinionated, and he feels that things are supposed to be this way, and he's going to make sure they're done this way, or he's going to kick and scream when they're not. And I just don't know if that's the healthiest situation for the Jets if they're interested in this sort of rebuild. And I'm like, Joe, I don't think you trade away a Garrett Wilson. And in fact, I know that Garrett probably wants out. I know that that's probably where things are at the moment. But at the end of the day, the Jets aren't going to voluntarily just put a for sale sign in front of their roster and say, hey, all of these players, give us a first and a third round pick for Garrett Wilson so we can then go in the draft and try to add a Garrett Wilson. We're going to go get a second round pick for Breece Hall so we can then go in the draft and try to find Breece Hall. We're going to go trade Jermaine Johnson so we can find Jermaine Johnson. That's the thing, is that these players are young. They're not aging. Yeah, you eventually have to pay them, but they're still players in the prime of their careers that you believe you can invest in and be a part of this turnaround. And yeah, sometimes the toxicity of certain situations forces players to say, I'm done. But the other day, and this is very, very important to remember, the Jets have team control over all of these guys. And even as bad as the situation went when it was Jamal Adams, the Jets still were not willing to trade him until they were absolutely blown away by that offer from the Seahawks for a safety. That deal that they got from Seattle is why they dealt Jamal Adams. They didn't deal Jamal Adams because Jamal Adams wanted to be dealt.
All right, guys, real quick. You know who's coming tomorrow night? Santa Claus.
Santa!
Yeah. So real quick, Connor, what was your favorite gift that Santa brought you?
When I was a kid, and it's actually very funny because my daughter is going to be downstairs playing with it in a little bit. She's obsessed with dinosaurs. But from Jurassic Park 2, I got a bull T-Rex. And that, to me, was like, it was so that it had, it could eat people. So, like, it had, like, its mouth was open, so the toys would go down, and then you would, like, take the toys back out of its stomach. So The bull T-Rex for me was my favorite gift I ever got as a kid. I wanted it so bad. I sang songs about it. It's my favorite. What?
I said not last year as a kid.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, but no, my bull T-Rex from the second Jurassic Park movie was my favorite toy.
Joe, what about for you? What did Santa bring you?
I mean, if we're talking about as a kid getting a Super Nintendo and just playing Tecmo Bowl and Mario Kart nonstop all the time, I still have the Super Nintendo floating around somewhere. I still also have a Curtis Martin jersey floating around somewhere that I used to wear and still fits somehow. It was too big when I was a kid. You don't get exciting gifts anymore at this point. It's just like, it's all about getting stuff for the kids. Get like a gift card here. Maybe you go out to dinner. It's not, you don't get the same pop anymore.
Well, you probably make the naughty list. You probably make the naughty list.
That's fair.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I still
too much
want
time podcasting. Yeah. Too much time podcasting about a 4-11 team. That's why. Yeah. I take gifts. I'll take them.
That's me. She
all
said,
right, guys,
my wife
have
says all
a
the
great
time,
holiday.
like with kids.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa. Enjoy everything. I hope, well, again, I don't think you guys made the nice list. You're probably on the naughty list, I think, as my shirt says, naughtiness. All right, guys, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Jets Final Drive. Once again, you can find the audio version of Jets Final Drive on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. For Connor Hughes and Joe Caporoso, I'm Jeane Coakley. See you Monday to recap the Jets-Bills matchup. Happy holidays.